Okay, so you are attending the CherryRoad Public Sector Assessment. And let's get started. So I am your speaker, Rod Clifton from DASHRD. I'm going to be delivering your CherryRoad webinar training. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started this morning. This is approximately a 3-hour webinar. We may be pausing regularly throughout the webinar to address questions as a group, and due to popular demand, we will be recording this webinar. So you'll receive an email from Recruit Onboard in the near future with a copy of these slides and information to access the recorded webinar. All right. So for those of you who have not attended a GoToWebinar recently, I'll briefly review the webinar features. The image on your left, it displays a GoToWebinar tool pane. So that orange arrow circled in red allows you to expand and collapse the full webinar window, which is illustrated by the image on your right. I've highlighted the hand feature in the right side, but we're not going to really be using that for the kind of true-false questions that we did on the Tuesday webinar because of the length of this webinar. We're going to kind of cut those out, unfortunately. So the purpose of this webinar, it's to aid you in learning how to use CPSA in conjunction with Recruit and Onboard to kind of perform all of your assessment-related tasks. And there are going to be some common terms, and I'll probably go over these a few more times, but I'm just kind of having us look at them now. But CPSA, it stands for CherryRoad Public Sector Assessments. That's obviously the system that we're training in. If you see R&O on the screen, it's just an abbreviation for Recruit and Onboard. Phase and package phase are two kind of confusing terms because for phase, when used in Recruit and Onboard, it's used with the correspondence and it corresponds to the order of your test overall. So like if you're on your second of 2 tests or your first of 4, it doesn't relate to package phase, which is used in CPSA. And it's used in CPSA as a number related to the type of test that you're doing, whether it's written, which would be like a number 2, performance, training experience, and all of this will make sense as we go through the training, but I'm just kind of highlighting them now and we'll go over them again. Exam retake period and exam score expiration. The retake is the amount of time a candidate has to wait before taking an exam again if your agency enforces such a policy. An exam score expiration is the amount of time that a passing score can be reused for the same exam again if your agency allows it. Just an idea of what CPSA can do for you and what it can't do. Test retake periods, you can use those to ensure that no one takes an assessment sooner than they should. Same with test expiration periods. It allows you to reuse unexpired passing scores. You can mass load candidate scores through the import feature. You can weight multiple exams if you choose to. Optionally, you can produce rankings for each of the candidates and send that over to Recruit and Onboard. There's integrations back and forth between CPSA and Recruit and Onboard with the information. Otherwise, no process has to run in order to make that happen. But what it can't do, it doesn't actually score your individual assessments. There isn't a self-scheduling functionality in CPSA, although it can be done in Recruit and Onboard, and I'll talk much later in the webinar about how the self-scheduling that's done in Recruit and Onboard relates to CPSA. It won't be a retraining, obviously, of self-scheduling, but it will talk about how they relate. There is no item analysis either, but there is a pass point analysis that does factor in EEO information. And this is just a real high-level view of kind of like that information flow between the two systems. It starts in Recruit and Onboard where you're kind of selecting options from a drop-down menu on your requisition. It's kind of like in number 7, the external services at the very bottom. You select those options to set it up so that information will go over to CPSA. And then when you are in CPSA, your candidates have flowed over there, you set up your assessment process, whether it's one or multiple phases. You can schedule manually in CPSA or self-schedule and Recruit and Onboard. And then still in CPSA, once candidates have tested, and you've imported their scores, you can kind of score their tests, produce fast pass-fail results and rank them optionally, and then send that information over to Recruit and Onboard. And once that's all sent over, once you're finished with that, you've done your assessments, you've passed, failed, you've ranked them, then over in Recruit and Onboard number 4, schedules and scores are there. You just resume the rest of your recruiting tasks. And that's kind of like the process that we're going to show today, but with a few branching scenarios at the end, such as kind of like how things relate to self-scheduling, how you can share scores from one rec to another. Just a real quick mention too on recommendations for browsers. It's a recommendation to use Firefox or Chrome, and if you don't have it, I would kind of suggest getting with your IT for the latest versions. It's nothing against IE, it's just this is a recommendation, and they would kind of help you get the best experience using the product. Throughout our training, our default CSW in the slides is going to be the Ohio CSW unless otherwise stated. So in terms of the various CSWs though, the setup to request screening services, etc., it's all the same. In addition, if the instruction is to move candidates to CPSA, and CPSA is found at a different part of another CSW, that's fine. The instruction would still remain the same. So a few slides back, we were talking about requesting a screening service while in Recruit and Onboard on the rec, and this is where it's done. Far down the rec in number 7, external screening, we find, you check the public sector assessment box and then you choose assessment phase from the drop-down under CherryRoad Assessment Solution. And just a heads up, what we're going to do in this particular webinar is we're going to go through these slides kind of like theory, and then we'll have pauses where we actually get in the system and see the same thing or even do the same thing. For the requisition implementation model, we would choose recruiter-centric. There's only one other choice, and it's candidate-centric, and we would always choose recruiter-centric. And then under allow background check data to be sent to partner, we just leave this as not specified. And from here, we just follow our typical procedures for posting the requisition and evaluating candidates. And then moving candidates from Recruit and Onboard to CPSA, at this point you have candidates who have applied and they've met your minimum qualifications, and they're in a status of MQ passed in this example and a step of MQ screening. So those candidates would be ready to move to CPSA. And the way that they move there is when you're utilizing the More Actions drop-down and Recruit and Onboard, and you change the step status and select CPSA from the new status drop-down. So once you save and close, the candidates will be sent to CPSA. And that's where the actual movement occurs. I mean, you still have to set up the screening service on the requisition under that number 7, external services, but this is when they actually move. So once you do that, you're still in Recruit and Onboard, and we see that these candidates are now in a CPSA status. So again, the only way that they go from Recruit and Onboard to CPSA is through the CPSA step wherever that status may be found. And I mentioned wherever it may be found because it can be in different areas when using other CSWs. So we're going to kind of look at this in the system real quick and log into Recruit and Onboard as Webinar Rod and look at our requisitions. And let's see, getting to our requisitions. And we'll just take a look at the requisition itself. Number 7. In external screening, you can kind of see that I made those selections. I selected public sector assessment, assessment phase, recruiter-centric, and not specified. So let's look at these people. They should be in our step before I move them. And one note that I noticed, our test environments this morning are running a little slow. I apologize for that ahead of time. All right. So this is in the step before. So I'm just going to move them over. Change step status to CPSA, save and close. And that's really all we need to do to move our candidates to CPSA. I think I'll kind of get back in the webinar. So just a quick reminder, when setting up our requisition and moving candidates to CPSA, there's key parts to that external services that have to be selected, and moving candidates to the CPSA status is actually when the trigger of the transfer of their information occurs. So scheduling in CPSA. Once logged into CPSA, we'll click requisition on the left side of the page under scheduling. So you'll see this when we get in the system, but on the left side of the page is a big menu, and under scheduling is requisitions. We'd click on that. We would find our requisition and click on that link. In our example that we're using in the slides, it's going to be 180,000 EQ, but obviously in the system, since we had to complete everything, we'll be using new information. Our candidates, when we are in CPSA, are shown as orders, and all of them will show on that front page of our requisition near the bottom of the page. So also notice that they're in a status of initiated. It's that third column at the bottom. This just means that they've been sent to CPSA, but nothing else has been done. No scheduling, no scoring. The first thing that we would do with these individuals is create a new requisition examination. If we have multiple phases to our assessment, we still only make the first one now, and then we run candidates through completion and make our next one. And completion would just be, scaling it and scoring it. We don't actually have to rank every single assessment. Ranking would be done at the end. These are necessary so that candidates can receive a schedule and a score. So in that screenshot, right next to the Orders tab is the Requisition Examinations tab. And once we click that, there's a blue New button that we click to get started on our requisition exam. That would bring us to this page, and it's an important page for us in CPSA and it's the only one that has these field requests. A lot of our initial entry here starts on the left side of this page, and other than the weight, which is over on the bottom at the right, we can leave the rest alone on the other side for now. There may be reasons to alter the information on that right side, and we'll go over that later when we talk about rescaling. The weight in the bottom right corner corresponds to this one requisition exam. So if we have others, their weights and this one should add up to 100. One moment. Okay, sorry about that. Let's see. So after we enter information on this page, we'll save, and we should always remember to click save whenever we make any changes to this section. I mean, that we always have to save basically whenever we make any changes here. One thing I want to draw attention to is to notice the magnifying glasses. So for example, you see them at requisition and package phase and examination. Those are lookup tables. So let's start with the requisition. That is, of course, the requisition we're working on. The package phase is, as we said earlier, used in CPSA to denote the test type. We're going to cover the package phase options in a few minutes, a few more slides. And further down the examination, the value shown here, that AGR 16871 written, that's just an example. It's not an actual test that's in the system, but it's an important piece of information because this is exactly what our retake eligibility report that we'll show later, it's what it needs in order to determine if our current requisition candidates have taken this one specific exam on other requisitions. Without this information filled out, the retake eligibility report cannot know that a candidate of this new rec took the exam previously. So we had reached out a while back asking agencies to kind of let us know about the values of exams that will be taking place at their agency. So for example, perhaps you know that you'll test a job code a great deal, and it'll be, let's say, a written exam. We asked what the job code was, what the retake period and expiration period, if any, was for that job code, and we then loaded all of those examinations into the system by agency so that in this field, in this examination field, you can choose it. If you have any that you'd like to add, you can make a request specifically for an examination to be added to CPSA through the Recruit and Onboard mailbox. But you should think about this preemptively because depending on resources and the size of the request, it could impact the timeline for getting these into the system. Moving on, the status and mode are drop-downs. Status shown here is scheduling, but later we'll talk about other options in that drop-down like scaling. Within mode, it lists group and individual, and we'll also get to more about mode soon. Everything else is entered manually. The number assigned, that third field number, is assigned based on the requisition number and the package phase number. And we'll learn more about package phases, but for example, 180,000 EQ-2, the -2 actually corresponds to written. And I'll show those package phases. One last thing, notice those circles around the letter I near the magnifying glasses. Hovering over those gives you additional information about your selection. For example, in the next slide, I'll hover over the examination. And when I hover over it, I get just a little bit more information about it. As I said, when we loaded all of this information into the system after receiving it back, not this example shown here, but by the way, but we would be loading in that organization code, which is your agency, the description so that it hopefully makes it easier to find and determine what you're selecting. We loaded the phase definition, we loaded the author, which is the same as the agency, and the exam waiting period in days, which is for the retake period, which is 120 here in this example, and the exam score expiration in days, which is 1 year in this example, which is how long someone's score is eligible to be reused. As I said a few slides back, we would cover the package phase options, and this is it. So when we click on the magnifying glass for the package phase, this is the pop-up window that shows our different test types. T&E at the top is for training and experience. I've actually put those numbers in. They're not really in the system, but their number shown here is just simply how they line up on this page, as you can see, 1 through 6. So if I were to choose written, that's the second one of these. And once written is selected, the number is saved here. So it has your requisition number and the package phase number. And this is something that we're going to want to keep in mind. I'm going to probably talk about this requisition exam phase a lot during our training. So again, we would have saved all of this information. And since we save, we click the Schedule Exams link under Related Links. But before we move forward, since we're talking about scheduling in CPSA, I just want to briefly talk about what this really means in our training. We're actually doing our scheduling functions in this section of the webinar in CPSA. So what happens is we make their schedule, send them over to Recruit and Onboard, then send the correspondence out from there. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I had to clear my voice. So again, we're actually doing our scheduling functions in this section of the webinar in CPSA. And what happens is we make their schedule, send them over to Recruit and Onboard, then send correspondence out from there. And that's one way of scheduling candidates. Another way is letting them schedule themselves. And as I said earlier, CPSA doesn't have that capability, but they can be invited to self-schedule in Recruit and Onboard, and we'll actually talk about that process and how it relates to the system specifically later in the webinar. There was some questions that I wanted to see before we move on. Gwen Beglin had a question. With passing testing scores being retained, an example of a year, is there a report we can pull to see who is on the list of passing scores? A report to see on the list of passing scores. Well, that's a good question. Within CPSA, there wouldn't really be a report from that standpoint. What I do think, though, is that in Recruit and Onboard, we possibly can think about a report of the people that have passed the test, because they'll be sent back over from CPSA to Recruit and Onboard. Optionally, they're ranked, but they'll certainly have pass-fail results as in one of their fields. So Gwen, I think we can get with you later to talk more about that report, and if we can devise something that'll show the various passing scores within your agency, we'll kind of communicate that more widely if other people are interested in it. But good question, Gwen. Thanks. So we will have clicked the Schedule Exams link, and that would bring us to the scheduling page, essentially. Notice we have that requisition exam number, in this case 180,000 EQ-2 near the bottom. or I'm sorry, at the top, and then near the bottom, notice the number of selected candidates. This should always correspond to the number of people that are eligible to be scheduled. So for example, let's say that you already scheduled 20 people for this test, but a new person came over late, and you let their application be considered for whatever reason, and you send them to CPSA. Then when you go to schedule to this rec exam again, that number would only be 1 and not the whole 21 because the others would already be scheduled. Essentially what this is looking for, if you remember earlier we looked at orders, it's looking for those initiated people that have initiated in their status. So moving further down, if we're group scheduling, we want to ensure that we always pay attention to capacity, as it's a required field when group scheduling. Depending on the capacity, the system will take, in our example, the first 20 and schedule them all for the same start date and time. If we changed our capacity to 10, then it would take the first 10. If we have, let's say we have 100 people to schedule and a capacity of 20 at a location, then we would schedule that first 20 and repeat the process for different times and even different dates. So to kind of remember the difference between group and individual scheduling, group is kind of like one date time, right? But if we're using individual, it's slightly different. In this situation, the thought is that people are coming at different times and they'll be there for a set period of time. So you may have 5 people, but you want them there starting at 8 o'clock for an hour only, and for there to be a 10-minute interval between when the first person ends and the second person begins. So you'd likely do this if you were tracking oral interviews, but you may have other uses for it. What's required here are the session durations and intervals. And I have like people coming in for an hour, and then, you know, once their hour ends, the other person doesn't start again for 10 minutes, and they don't start their hour. So to remember individual scheduling, that would be multiple dates times. Really, it would be more multiple times, more than dates, but obviously for the group that we're scheduling, it's most likely multiple times in a day. Regardless of which one you're using, and I'm going to kind of move forward with group scheduling, you're going to get a start time, or you would want to enter a start time, and you click the calendar pops up that allows you to pick the date and time, and you'd fill this out for both the start and end times. And underneath that, you would be able to also set your morning, lunch, and afternoon breaks if you decide to enter those, although they are optional. And then when you're finished, you just click the submit button, the blue submit button. And just once you finish scheduling, just another reminder to notice that requisition exam number. In this case, it's 180,000 EQ-2. It's always good to track this number because we kind of use it for importing information. So being done with the scheduling, we click the Send It link to send the schedule information to Recruit and Onboard. And just as a point of reference, in our example, we're kind of using 3/5 and 3/6 dates. And the reason why this is important is that later on in our slides, when we talk about retake eligibility, it's ran against these dates. I know today is like 3/29, so I don't want to confuse people. When I did this, I was using 3/5 and 3/6. So we'll kind of get some practice in the system. And kind of a reminder, people have kind of been sent to CPSA, so we'll log into CPSA as webinar Rod. I don't know why. That's funny. And this is that menu on the left that I was talking about. So we would click on our requisitions. And we had sent over that 180,000 I-8. And then once inside, we see our orders. Notice that like we were talking about earlier, they're in the status of initiated. So we're going to make a new requisition exam. So we click on that requisition exam tab and the blue new button. And this brings up that page I was talking about that had all the various magnifying glasses and so on. Our package phase in our example here. Notice how we had the 1 through 6. That's just what number these are. If I selected polygraph, it'd be number 6 at the end of our requisition, like 180,000 I8-6, but I'm going to choose written. I'm going to choose an examination. Webinar Rod is commerce, so he only has commerce exams. Group, I'm going to put 100, but again, if you had multiple exams, you would just want to consider what weight this particular exam has. So, maybe you're having 33 here, and the next two will end up being 34 and 33, but I'm just going to show one because the process is exactly the same as you go through each exam. And again, anytime we make changes here, we always want to save. Notice that rec exam number now, 180,000 I8-2. That's our requisition and our package phase. And essentially, now that we have, we are making, let's see. Now that we have that, we can actually schedule the exams. And let's see. We'll just use, well, actually, let me show group or individual. I'm not going to use, but this is where I was talking about the session duration and session interval. But I'm going to use group and just choose a location. Any location. Actually, I didn't load that particular one, so we'll just pick Kent State. Start time. We'll use today at 3 o'clock. And whenever you're picking your date and time, just click the green check mark. And so we have our required capacity, although I don't have 20 people, but I've put in the 20. If we wanted, we can add morning, lunch, and afternoon breaks. I'm not going to add any breaks. Everybody will be all at the same time. I'm group scheduling for them all to come in at the same time, and click submit. And now they're all scheduled for later today at 3 o'clock. So I'm just going to go ahead and send that information over to Recruit and Onboard. And that will take some time, so I'm going to continue the PowerPoint presentation as we're waiting. All right. So when scheduling, it is important to remember the exam phase number created upon saving. To definitely pay attention to the weighting of the phase. And group scheduling kind of requires knowing capacity. Individual scheduling requires knowing session duration and intervals. All right. So this is a lot of information on the screen. We've moved people over to CPSA and we scheduled them in CPSA. However, we'd like to know who's not eligible due to being in the retake period. If you're an agency that uses that, or whose scores we can actually reuse that has taken the same exam. Now, what I have up on the screen, this is previous information, and I want to show it so we can collectively understand what we expect from this report. So this is actually on the screen. This is just one screen of information. Actually, this information can be across multiple requisitions. I just have it in one. So we're checking our current requisition against it. And in my example here, for this exam, it has a year of eligibility. Obviously, you can have far less than that or far more than that. And 120 days for the retake period. That year of eligibility and 120 days for retake is set up when the actual test is entered through configuration here at DAS-HRD. So this may take a few moments, but I actually want to go over our expectations for each of these so that we all kind of clearly understand what our report is going to be giving us. In addition, remember a few slides back we kind of said we were using 3.5 and 3.6, and that kind of matters as it relates to these dates in this example. So for the first person, Ray Carter, we can reuse his passing score because he's within his year of eligibility. You notice that he took on his exam date is 3/12/2017, so he has a little bit of eligibility left on 3.5 and 3.6. John Kramer, although he would be considered within our retake period by the report, that's okay because we can reuse his passing score as he's within his year of eligibility. Bill Smith failed the test, and he's within the retake period. Notice he took it recently within that 120-day example that we were talking about earlier. Roger Moore, although he's within the retake period, we're going to reuse his passing score because it'd be within his year of eligibility. Now, John Wiggins, the second from the bottom, should not show on our report. Although he failed the exam, he's outside the retake period, so he'd basically be eligible to take the exam. And Patty Crowley, although she's within the retake period, we can reuse her passing score as she's within the year of eligibility. So I just wanted to kind of go through that just so we're kind of in the mindset of what the retake eligibility report looks for. So in CPSA, when using the test retake eligibility report, we would want to know the examination that we're checking against. Our example is the AGR 16871 written that we're checking candidates against. The report helps to determine if the candidates on our new requisition have either taken the exam we intend to administer within the retake period, or if they have a reusable passing score that's yet to expire. If the exam we're using has no previous candidate data in the system, then obviously we wouldn't have to run the report. Or if we don't have retake periods at our agency nor reuse of unexpired scores for candidates, then obviously we don't have to run this report. So to run this report, we click the link shown here near the bottom, that test retake eligibility link, and it's under scheduling on the menu that's on that left side of the page. One other note, in order for the report to look at previous recs, that previous assessment, same exam, has to be completed. So in other words, the previously administered exam should have been scheduled and scored basically. So in the new requisition ID, we would enter the requisition that we're running the report for. This would be our new rec. And it kind of helps us determine if someone on our new rec has taken the exam within the retake period or if a candidate within our new rec has a passing score that hasn't expired. We would enter the examination underneath that, and then over on the right, we would enter the exam start date and end date. I have 3.5 and 3.6 in our example. And then click Generate Report. The report outputs based on your criteria. It shows the candidate ID and name, the old rec ID and rec title that the information is pulling from, the requisition exam number that the information is pulling from, the previous date, time, and raw score, the old exam adjusted score, and I'll be showing these types of things in CPSA, what those are, the old exam adjusted score, if the score was rescaled, the old exam result of pass-fail, and retake eligibility, you notice on the far right. Now, retake eligibility is based on whether the candidate is eligible to retake the exam based solely on the retake period. But if they pass the exam, you may decide to reuse their score anyway. So when you see fail no, like a fail of the old exam result and no on retake eligibility, that, you know, that first one for Bill Smith, he's someone that you're probably obviously not going to want to have retake the exam. But for example, the second one, John Kramer, he passed within the year of eligibility. And I mean, he may have taken it recently, but that doesn't matter. So I mean, the retake eligibility is going to say no on him, but the retake eligibility column is based solely on your retake period. If people have eligibility left, though, the report still outputs them as having eligibility with their passing score and their, you know, the date they took it. So then you would output the results to Excel, and this is a big screenshot, but before you save, the top 3 rows are just informational. They are helpful, but they're unnecessary for importing later, so I suggest removing them before saving the Excel. But before you even do that, there is something that's just as important. In that requisition exam number column, the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth one we see there, before saving the document, we want to change the requisition exam number to the one that we're testing for. Remember in our earlier examples, we used 180,000 EQ-2. So we would make the change to this. I mean, you can basically just put it in the top cell and then you know, copy it down. But we make this change so that we can properly import this information to our current requisition later. And, you know, if you don't want to import all of this information for whatever reason, you can also take those rows out too. But either way, we want to make this change to that requisition exam number before saving. And then when saving, we save as an Excel workbook. So remember to do that, because it may come up as save as HTML or something like that. We always want to save these as Excel workbook and then click Save. And now we want to kind of practice this in the system. So we'll go to CPSA again. Oh, I had some type of error. We'll have to see what happened. So just as a reminder, people should have been sent to CPSA by now, scheduled, and that schedule information was sent back to Recruit and Onboard. And so now that we're in CPSA, we're on the Requisitions tab. Just as reference, I want to show where my previous information for here was in our example, in our system example. This is one example. So in my new requisition in our system examples, the one that I'm on is 180,000 I6. This is people that previously took the exam, and I'm going to be in, we were using 180,000 I8. So just looking at some of these people, Darlene Carmelo previously passed this exam. Edward Milner failed. So there will be some new people also on my new exam. And that new one, if we look at the scheduled people, so notice that Darlene Carmelo is in there as well. So we'll be kind of reusing a score for her. A new people, for example, Aaron Webinar, Salma Escobar, those are people that are not on that previous one or have ever taken this. So they'll be new people to take the exam. So let's go ahead and run the test retake eligibility report. Our new requisition that we're using, 180,000 I8. Our exam, I believe, was in Commerce 66142. I believe, I got to get this out of the way. I believe we said 29th, but I mean, we can put dates around it. It doesn't matter. Any dates within here. And generate our report. So for example, Darlene Carmelo that we highlighted earlier, she took the exam and passed, and she would be within our score reuse period. Ed Milner failed within the retake period, so he's going to be somebody that we're going to disposition later. So Darlene Margard, she passed it. Notice how it says no on retake eligibility. That just means she recently took it, but she passed. So as an agency, I'm going to decide to use her passing score. She has eligibility left. So we had 10 people on that, but obviously we only showed 5 people. So we have a mix of people that either have eligibility left, these passing people, or somebody that I'm going to later disposition. So let's output to Excel. All right, and this is the information that we were running off of. I was looking at, 180,000 I8 for this job code in this exam, and this was my retake and score eligibility parameters. And I just, these are my date inputs. I could have said 3536, I suppose. But I am going to get rid of this informational rows. And when we import, we actually don't need all of this, but the system only grabs the information it needs. So for example, it's going to need this. And remember what I was saying earlier about changing this requisition exam number. We're using 180,000. Oops. I8-2. So we will change all of those to that. And we can save this now as an Excel workbook. let's call this webinar 3/29/18, save as Excel workbook. Actually, we want to save this on our desktop. Webinar 3/29 Excel workbook and save. All right. So basically, through that report, we've determined people who will have reuse, and people that, in Ed Milner's case, have failed, unfortunately. And we've also saved them later to import. And we can kind of get back to our PowerPoint. Okay, so when running the retake eligibility report, some things to remember are it's looking at people on our current requisition and their results in the same test or examination, I should really say, on previous requisitions, taking into consideration your retake periods and your expiration periods. And it's also based on our date parameters. And when we output to Excel, we want to change that rec exam number to what we're using before saving, because we will potentially import that information later. So moving on to importing pre-assessment in CPSA. So thus far we've moved people to CPSA, we've scheduled them, we've checked their retake and expiration, and now we want to import relevant information such as scores to reuse, and if you choose, candidates who failed within the retake. And this is importing of candidates that fail within the retake period and candidates who have unexpired test scores. This method means that if you're applying and failed previously within the retake, we're still importing that score and date time and dispositioning you in Recruit and Onboard. Of course, you maybe could just delete them or in CPSA or let's say disposition them in Recruit and Onboard. That's up to you, but I think best practice is to kind of import them all and disposition them in Recruit and Onboard. So our examples will kind of follow importing the failing score and schedule. So as you kind of see, under scoring in that menu is the import scores link, and you click on that link. So once you do that, you would end up clicking the paperclip icon near the upper right portion of the page near the submit and save. That would bring like an attachments pop-up box, and you would just click the choose files button in the attachments pop-up box. And then you would find your output document that you kind of stored earlier after running that retake eligibility report and click open. And then you would see your spreadsheet right there in the blue in our example, but you would click that X in the upper right hand corner of the attachments pop-up box. And then you would just click the update data button in the middle of the page, and when the system is finished updating, it'll actually show a message that the records were loaded successfully. And this is the message that we've kind of uploaded the records successfully to our requisition in CPSA. So in our example here, we've imported information for people that had previous information. So for example, Bill Smith failed in the retake period, and there were 4 people that already took and passed the exam, and those are the 4 at the bottom. but there's two new people here, John and George. And although they might have took the test a long time ago, they actually had no eligibility left. So they're testing anew. So their schedule would just remain as seen because we're not importing information for them. And we will need to correspond with them at one point in Recruit and Onboard about their schedule. So we click the Send It link. You'll kind of see it at the bottom. It's really small in this screenshot. But we click the Send It link to get all of that information that we see there back to Recruit and Onboard. So, I mean, if we think about it, what we're sending back to Recruit and Onboard is we're sending the old, for those reused people that we're looking at, we're sending their old date and times, their scores. For the failed people like Bill Smith, we're sending his old date and time and failing score. And for the new people, that's going to be actually their new score or new schedule, but no score because we want to correspond with them. So this will make more sense when we get over there because we're going to organize all that information and know who we need to correspond with. So we would go back to Recruit and Onboard, and in order to correspond with everybody, the people that we need to correspond with, we'll want some type of organization in Recruit and Onboard first. So once logged in and on our requisition with our candidates still in the CPSA status, we changed the list format found in the upper right-hand corner of our view to Phase 1 details so that we can determine who needs to be dispositioned as failing the test within the retake period and who needs to be moved to a status of additional screening in progress, let's say, due to having a score that's being reused. Excuse me for just a moment while I clear my voice. Sorry about that. Thanks for the pause. Let's see. So, and we're going to click on that so we can choose Phase 1 details. That's the list formats button. And this is the Phase 1 details that I spoke of. We would click on that and click Apply. So then when we're looking at our candidates, we kind of see those top columns, that P1 name, P1 exam location, things of that nature. All of that information is actually corresponding to CPSA. So it's information that's coming over from there. And we'll organize this list of people, and I would suggest starting with the people that failed within the retake period. So we're going to select Bill Smith here to kind of get started. We would select him and then select the reject so that we can disposition him, and we would disposition him as not selected and select, I guess, failed testing in the additional information shown at the bottom. Now I've added comments here as well. You might see that, and perhaps you might want to do it or leave it blank. But once we save, we'll have moved the people that failed in the retake period to not selected, so they're no longer in the same status with the others. And then we're coming back and we're choosing these individuals now. I know John Kramer is a different color, unfortunately, in this screenshot, but we're choosing all four of them. Notice that they have, the previous dates. They have scores already. So we're going to kind of move these to, another status. I'm going to move them to additional screening in progress using the change step status from more actions than saving. So we'll have moved the people that failed retake and the people whose scores we're going to reuse. What's left are the people that have been scheduled but haven't came into our assessment yet because they've not yet received correspondence. So we'll select them. These are those same two people, Wiggins and Cranston. We need to send correspondence to them so they'll know to attend our CPSA scheduled assessments. So from the More Actions drop-down, we select Send Correspondence. And you may be familiar with this, in your Recruit and Onboard training, but, we're doing this from a template, so we select that button. And we select the copy intro as a standard introduction for the CPSA schedule. But basically, I want to ensure that we understand the difference between our earlier 180,000 EQ-2, which is just talking about the written and, that package phase, and then what we're seeing here, which is phase 1, which means that this is the first test of multiple. So if we were on the second test of multiple, we would use phase 2 regardless of what our postfix on our rec exam was. I mean, if it's 180,000 EQ-4, whatever, it wouldn't matter. The phase right here corresponds to our own succession of tests. And that was a little confusing for me at first, so hopefully it's not as bad for you. But phase in Recruit and Onboard, that corresponds to yours. So if I was sending out a letter on my 4th test, it would be phase 4, right? And then further down the page, we're going to select the copy of the signature. So we're going to have, this is all the same screen, but I kind of scrolled down. I wanted to break it into 2 parts because it's actually scrolling. So essentially in this example, we selected the intro, we selected the phase, that we're using of our own tests. In this instance, it's phase 1 because it's the first one, and the signature. So then in that kind of bottom left-hand corner, we would kind of see the review all. We'd want to click that button, and then we would have the various people, so we can, links to their letters that we can look at. So if we clicked on one of those links, we would see, the exam location coming over, the exam date, time, please bring up picture ID and any verbiage. And when all of this looks good, we would click the send button, and all of those candidates would receive their correspondence through email. So lastly, we would move those people too, so that, it's that same step as everybody else. I've moved them to additional screening in progress. That way we've organized all of our original testers, whether they failed within the retake period, previously passed and were using their score, or taking the test upcoming in the future and required correspondence. So now we can kind of practice this in the system. But before I do that, I want to kind of see if there's some questions before we move forward. I think I was told that there was. I see one. Was there any more? Will CPSA have the same security role parameters? In other words, can you only see your user group's candidate assessment information that was loaded, whereas the administrator can see what was loaded for? I think I understand this, Reagan, but if I don't, please let me know. You're only going to see your requisitions, for one. So when we looked on that requisition tab, you're only going to see ODOT requisitions. And then from there, you're only going to see the requisitions the examinations that we load for you. So you're only going to be able to access and add the ODOT examinations that you give to us to configure with your retake period and reuse period if you have them. And you don't have to do that, but it's only going to be your candidates on your requisitions. I think that's what you're saying, but if not, let me know. Throw out another question, or maybe say there's more. I'll kind of wait for Reagan to respond to that. Can central office see all candidates? Yes. So basically the way we set up users is if you're central in Recruit, you're going to be central in CPSA, because CPSA operates on the same organization codes that's in Recruit. So if Reagan Morrison, for example, has central plus all other ODOT districts, she's going to see all of them. But if a district person at ODOT only has that one district, they can only see theirs. It's almost like they're almost separate agencies. So yeah, it's separated out the same way that Recruit and Onboard is. I probably should have said that in the beginning. Does that answer your question, Reagan? Okay, great. All right. So let's get in the system and put this to practice. So I'm in CPSA again as Rod Webinar, or Webinar Rod, whatever way you want to look at it. To this point, we've moved people over. Just a reminder of what we've done in the system. We've moved people over to CPSA. We've scheduled them in CPSA. We've checked retake and expiration, and we've saved those results. So we're kind of ready to import that data now and then go over and organize it and Recruit and Onboard. So let's click on Import Scores. That's under Scoring, and it's right here. Oh, you know what? I'm going to show this before I forget, because I know I don't have a slide for it. Some of you will see different colors. This is very minor, but I'm going to show it anyway. If you click on this Settings button and Theme, you can change the colors. So just letting you know that, because I don't have a slide about it and I don't want to forget it. All right, something fun. All right, so we're going to go to Import Scores, and we are going to do what we did in theory. We're going to click on the paperclip button and find our webinar 329 if we can. That's not it. Yes, there it is. Webinar 329. Let me just make sure I saved it today at 9:52. Sounds good. See how it kind of pops into this attachments pop-up box? And so I've done what I need in that box, so I'll just close it and then hit the Update Data button. And it says records updated successfully to let us know that we've done that. So let's go to our requisition and see that that data was imported in thus far. Candidate examinations. So let me just look at it. So that, if you might remember, we had about 5 people come up, but some of these people didn't come up because they hadn't taken it. So for example, Erin Webinar, she hasn't taken this exam again before, so she doesn't have a score to reuse. She has the original schedule date. However, the first person, I can't see them, unfortunately, Eduardo Martinez, did take this. We're reusing his score. We're reusing Darlene Carmelo's score, for example. And we'll be asking, wasn't there somebody that, yeah, Ed Milner. He had failed recently within our retake period, so we'll be dispositioning him. But essentially, a few of these people will actually be coming in anew, these 3 people. And I think there's a question, so let me kind of pause in what I'm doing and look that up. There's a few questions. Cool. Oh, it's the bottom. Okay. Does CPSA support test data imported from applications other than Excel? For example, if we score tests in Access, can the scores be imported? Oh, good question, Aaron. I haven't actually even tested importing Access scores, but that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but I will get with the developer and find out today and then I'll try to send that information out wide because, yeah, a lot of you may actually even have that data in Access. One thing about the Excel, though, I want to say, and this doesn't mean that you have to use it, but I do when I'm going through these slides, and it'll become apparent later, is I'm kind of actually sending Excel rosters out to proctors, or maybe that's you, maybe that's you, you're the recruiter, but I'm sending those out to whomever is going to see these people with the new information so that they can write the scores on there and then take that back and import it. But, I mean, you could do the same thing with an Access file too. So, yeah, I will look into Access and get an information as soon as I can, as soon as I hear from the developer. But thank you for that question because I haven't tested anything in Access yet. Okay. Okay, and I think I'm mostly done here because we've imported. So we want to, after importing, send this information over. And I don't want to gloss over. I mean, we've imported the information. We've went back to this requisition to look at the information. And now we're just going to send it over to Recruit and Onboard. So I'm going to send it, then look in Recruit and Onboard. Where do I have Recruit and Onboard? Is this it? Oh, I've been signed out, of course. No problem. We'll just log right back in. Webinar Rod. All right, and let's find our requisition. I believe it was I-8. And as I kind of said earlier, a little bit of a slowness in our testing environments. I apologize for that again. Okay, let's look on this CPSA step that we moved them to. And change, am I already in it? Yeah, change to phase 1 details. The information may not yet be over here because it's also slow coming over. Oh, cool. All right, so let's have a look at this information for a second. All right, so we sent the information over. Do I have everybody's information? I apologize for the... Looks like everybody's information is over. That's great. So let's look at what we have thus far. Let me show you that again. I kind of glossed over it, but we kind of came over here and we did this in our slides. We came over to our requisition and found it and went to the last step that everybody was in. In this case, it was CPSA, but we wanted to change our list formats so that it would show information from CPSA. Now, I've already did that, but I just want to kind of click on that button and show you what that is. Notice the different options. This one is phase 1 details that we're looking at because, you know, it's the first test, and it's showing that we have some scores for some people, you know, some previous scores. So, for example, Darlene Carmelo took it not a year ago, but several months ago and passed. We're going to reuse her score, what was it? Ed Milner, I believe, failed. but I don't have his for some reason. So maybe they're still transferring. I'm going to click the link again. Yeah, okay, so they must be still transferring. I apologize for that. So there must be a few more scores. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think that's all that there was. I can check CPSA real quick. I'll have to ask about that. I-8. I'm just checking to see what scores I'm expecting to come over. So I'll look at the candidate examinations again. There was these 5. And then when we go over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. So we have everybody we expect. All right, so the first thing that we had done in the slides is we kind of dispositioned the failed retake. So we'll do that with Ed Milner. Reject candidates. We can put some comments in if we want. Save and close. And then we want to move our reuse people so we know who we have to correspond with. There wasn't any others, I believe. No. So we're going to move them. In this case, I'm moving them past inviting to self-schedule to additional screening in progress. And what's left are the people that I need to correspond to. So we will send correspondence to them. Okay. All right. And am I doing? One moment. Okay. CPSA written scheduled. You know what? I didn't actually have that slide. I apologize. So let me just go back to that because I don't think I had that slide in my PowerPoint. So again, we'll look at this starting from the beginning on send correspondence. We're going to click on send correspondence, and in this instance, I had those phases and everything, but there's also these different test types. So I'm doing written, but I mean, if you were doing oral or performance or polygraph, then you would choose one of those. For interviews, for example, you might choose oral. For written, I'm doing that, and then the phases correspond to whether if written is my first test, second, third, fourth. Obviously, it's my first one. And then we're also including the signature and clicking next. Review all, and we can look at any of these. So Aaron Webinar has the exam phase, which is written, and the date and time and the location and some additional verbiage. So we can save that, and for all of these people, send them their correspondence. And then we can move all of these people so that it's organized together. And let's look over in that one. We started with 9 or 10 as you remember, but we have only 9 because we dispositioned the failing candidate. But here's our 9 people. We have the people that we're reusing here. We have the people that have been sent a correspondence with their new test date and time. So essentially we've kind of imported old information, reuse and information, unexpired test scores. We've dispositioned people that shouldn't take the test, and we've organized everybody. So we can kind of get back into the webinar. All right, so yeah, when importing and sending correspondence, just some reminders. Having ran the retake eligibility report, we're importing failed retake schedules and scores, and we're also importing unexpired test scores for the same assessment, same examinations, using that kind of previously saved spreadsheet that we ran or that we saved after the retake eligibility report. When we send the data to Recruit and Onboard, we want to ensure our list formats are set so we can organize all the candidates depending on what they have or haven't done in the past on this assessment. And since CPSA doesn't notify candidates of schedule, we actually use Recruit and Onboard to notify them. All right, so let's talk about sending schedule information to a proctor, and then it might be even keeping it for yourself or sending it to somebody else. But in this section, we want to produce a roster from CPSA that gets sent to the proctor, and essentially the proctor should know who's coming for the test and when, so that he or she can ensure that they've come or mark as a no-show, input the score, the roll score, even input any schedule changes, so that can later be imported. And so to do this, we would select the exam roster report under scheduling from the menu on the left side of the page. And we have a number of different, well, we have 4, I guess, options that we can use to find our exam, but the ones that we're likely to use the most are probably rec exam or examination, and my preference and the one that I think is best to use is that requisition exam. So you remember we were using 180,000 EQ-2 for that one rec exam. But you can use the examination. So 2 fields that we must put in our parameters, however, are the exam, begin dates from and to, and then once we enter the rec exam, let's just say, and input our dates, we can generate the report. And so in this example, I've entered the test, in this case AGR 21230 as an oral assessment, and generated what's seen. And then I can export this information to Excel using the button already on the page. So I can kind of remove, and I did so in this example, the first few lines is they're informational. and then save the rest as an Excel workbook. I can actually add any other columns to it or take some out. The main ones that we need to later import, though, are the rec exam number, the exam date and time, the unique ID, and raw score, and I've highlighted those here. But one thing you may have noticed when we were importing, it has an instructional page right on that import page that shows you what those columns are. So again, reminding that we'd save this as an Excel workbook before sending out to the proctor. So now that we've ran the report and saved it, then sent it to the proctor of the exam, he or she will not only know who's expected, but can send us back the raw scores and any schedule changes so that we can import that information post-assessment. So these are our 9 candidates in CPSA in our example slides, our slides examples. They're here having either previously failed in retake, previously passed, and we're reusing their score. They're just recently tested for the first time. The roster is out to the proctor, but not yet back in this example. So I want to call attention to a few of these. Wiggins and Cranston at the top are taking the test anew. And for our example, I wanted a few more people, so I actually added a few others at the bottom. Notice that Dover and Clayton at the bottom are scheduled for 3-6 and 3-7 right now. I'm just calling out attention to that because we're going to change it through import. So I want to show that in action. So in our next slide, I want us to imagine that test candidates came in and took the test, and our proctor filled out the scores, the schedule changes on the roster spreadsheet that we would have sent to them. Okay? And then this would be the spreadsheet that we got back. So it would be basically those 4 diamonds that I had on the previous one. Notice that it has the 4 main columns: unique ID, rec exam number, exam date, time, raw score. Those are the ones that we have to have, plus a few others which are okay. I mean, we can still import this. We see that Wiggins came and passed, I guess, with a 85 raw score. That's his raw score only. Cranston didn't show. Dover and Clayton also showed, but they showed on different dates and times. Let's say that they just decided to come in with everybody else, with one, with a high passing score and another not. So we'll import their scores using the same process that we did earlier. So under scoring, we click the import scores button. So again, utilizing the same process we used earlier with importing, this is what we're left with. Notice that these are the people that we highlighted earlier, now with updated information. Right, Cranston didn't come in. So at the bottom, Jan and Alan, Jan Dover and Alan Clayton, they were 3-6 and 3-7, but we imported their new schedule. Right, so I just wanted to show that. That's why I added those 2 extra people. So just one note, at this point we've only imported their raw scores. Notice at the very top of those diamonds it just says raw score. It's not the adjusted score. We haven't rescaled the raw scores to produce a final adjusted score, and that's coming later. One other side note, instead of importing data, it may be necessary from time to time to simply manually update a score or an exam date time. So I wanted to talk about that just really briefly. If you double click in the raw score or adjusted score, it allows you to change the number and then click that green check mark. Or if you double click in the exam date, it'll bring up a calendar with time at the bottom so that you can manually select the new date time, then click the green check mark. So we're going to try to go through this in the system now. Get out of the PowerPoint and get into CPSA, which is over here. Let's go to requisitions. So just a reminder of where we're at in the system though. We kind of last imported previous results and acted upon them, as well as corresponded with people taking the test. So we should be able to have an exam roster report. So let's click on that. And then we'll use our, in this case, we'll just use, I always do that, okay, 180,000. I8-2, that's the only one. And put in our dates. I can put in the 29th and the 30th, or I can do it wide, it doesn't matter. And generate our report. Notice that this doesn't have the people that we're reusing, right? Because they're not, you know, they're not going out to retest. It just has the people that have no score right now. So let's kind of look at them in comparison. I believe we were at I8. Look at our candidate exams. So does it have Ed Milner? Let's check for that. Ed Milner is not on there. We have 5 people. So we should have Carrie McDonald, Darlene Margard, Darlene Carmelo, and Eduardo Martinez, but there's a 5th person for some reason. What did I do wrong? Allison Bonner. She also, did I just know? Oh, I'm sorry. I should have also remembered she's new too. She doesn't. I'm completely doing this wrong. I apologize. 1, 2, 3, all the blank people is who should be on it. We're reusing the others, or in his case, he's being dispositioned. Okay, sorry for the confusion. Okay. Feel much better now. So we should see Bonner, Fenard, Aaron Webinar, Escobar, and Collivan. Bonner, Collivan, Escobar, Fenard, and Webinar. Yes, that is who we see because they don't have a score. These are the people that are going to be going out to the proctor. Okay. So we want to save this as Excel. And one thing to notice before we do this, this already has our rec exam number. You know, we're on I8. It has the written postfix, so we don't even have to actually change that on the exam roster report, which is nice. And let's see. Did I just say no? That was hilarious. Okay. I told it not to do it. Let me try this again. Okay. Enable editing. It does have the informational rows as well. That's the date parameters I put in. I put in the rec exam when I was looking for it. And as I was saying, I can save this as is and send it out to the proctor, or keep it for myself if I am that person. And I can, obviously, the system is not importing all this. It's only importing this column, you know, the rec exam number, the unique ID, and the roll score. So let's go ahead and save. to our desktop in this instance. Exam roster 3/29/18. Excel workbook, just a reminder. All right, so we've kind of saved this. This could be now, as we were saying, sent to the roster, or if it's, if that's you have it for test day. But let's now assume that everybody has kind of came in and tested and like enter information to this spreadsheet to kind of simulate getting it back, so that we can kind of do the same thing that we were seeing in our slides. So we'll enter some scores and some schedule changes. I'll just say 95, 94, 93, 92, and I don't want to fail Erin Webinar. She's got the same last name as me. How about 93? So let's go ahead and say Patrick didn't do too well. All right, and let's change some dates. Let's say that and some people had mentioned that I'm not speaking as loud. I apologize for that. I'll try to make sure that I keep a consistent tone. So let's go ahead and change Salma's date. Let's just say that she came in the next day, something came in up, and Allison couldn't make it in with everybody, but she knew that she could make it in a day early, and the proctor is like, sure, come in. So we've changed the dates. We'll go ahead and save that. So I think people were saying they can't hear me, so let's do another hand raise by participants to see if you can hear me. Oh, okay, good. So there were some people that couldn't hear me, though. It might have been just because I was talking so low earlier. Okay, so we'll keep on going. And, essentially now we've kind of changed this because we're assuming that people came in and tested, and the proctor, or whomever that might be, entered their roll scores as well as any schedule changes, and now it's been kind of sent back to us as the recruiter, and we can import that information. So we'll go to CPSA, and as we were showing in the slides, click on Import Scores, and we'll find that attachment, choose Files, Exam Roster, there it is. Open. Once it does that, we can see that it's there. We can click on X and hit Update Data. All right, everything's updated successfully. So let's just kind of go back to that requisition. It was I-8. And look at our candidates. Notice that everybody now has a score here because, those 5 people that didn't have a score, we've imported their scores. 3/29 was the date that they were coming in, but remember Allison, we kind of said she would come in a day early. I think Patrick, or no, Salma came in a day late, was it? Okay. We also have the failing score for Patrick and all their scores entered. I think we can bring that up. still exam roster. Yeah, we changed Salma's test date to 3/30, so she's in there with the 3/30 date. Salma Escobar. Yep. All right, so we've basically done all of the importing, and we kind of, well, basically, actually, before that, we produced a roster and we sent it out, and we got it back with the scores and the schedule changes, and we imported that information. So at this point, we only actually have raw scores. We haven't, rescaled them yet, and that's coming up. But I think there are some questions that I'm going to kind of get to, so we'll pop those out and see what we have. Will there be a sort of adverse, I think it's Aaron had a question. Will there be any sort of adverse impact analysis report available from Taleo CherryRoad? Well, one of the things that CPSA doesn't do is item analysis. What it does do, though, is a pass point analysis. I will be showing that. So you'll see that in upcoming slides and in the system. Kind of get an idea of how that's used. It's quite possible, Aaron, though, that you guys use more of an item analysis, I think. And I think from the item analysis perspective, we can work with you or talk about alternatives on how that might be done offline, because CPSA, 2 points, they don't have an item analysis, and they don't have plans right now, at least, for an item analysis. They definitely have plans of upgrading this product in the near future, but I don't remember reading item analysis on that plan in the near future. So I think that we should make that something that we talk about with you offline, and Nick and I can definitely do that and hopefully give you some ideas. All right, let's get back into the PowerPoint slides. All right. When scheduling additional candidates or importing post-assessment, the exam roster report in CPSA is used to produce a roster for the proctor that you can kind of send out to them. Or if it's you, you'll have it for yourself. The proctor can fill out the raw scores as well as any schedule changes and send it back to the recruiter to import. So in this importing, it's actually done no differently than our earlier imports. Any import, as long as it knows the candidate IDs, as long as it knows that requisition exam number, it can import it directly to that those candidates' rows. You can do manual updates as well to scores and schedules by double-clicking in the cell, making the change, and clicking on the green check mark. So let's move on to establishing pass-fail results. Thus far, we've tested candidates and we've imported their scores to the exam phase that we're attempting to establish pass-fail results for. Now, in CPSA, we would find the requisition that we're scoring assessments for and click the link to that, click the Rec Exam tab, then the Rec Exam phase link, and that would bring us here to what we're seeing. We've seen this before. So in that top section of the new page, on the status, instead of where it used to be scheduling, we would select scaling in the status field. And of course, we would have to save because we made a change in those fields. So we would save, and then we would scale it, but Previously, since we selected scaling and saved, after doing so, we can click on the pass point analysis. That's optional, but we'll kind of move forward showing a pass point analysis. And there's a lot to cover. I mean, this is a big screen, but the pass point analysis grid is displayed, featured the color-coded cumulative frequency percentage. And that's used to determine the appropriate raw score pass point for the population of candidates. The ethnicities or genders that are shaded in red are at risk of being adversely impacted at that kind of a denoted raw score level that you're seeing there. Now, usually a recruiter might design an exam so that the pass point is maybe at a raw score of 70, let's just say, as an example. And if there are ethnicity or gender columns that are shaded in red at that 70 level, then you might need to lower the pass point for this exam to a level where there's no red shading. So once you've determined the appropriate pass point raw score, you just click the browser back button to return to the rec exam page where you would use the pass point raw score to rescale everyone's score and determine their pass-fail status. That was on that right side of the page that we kind of left alone earlier when we were developing our rec exam. And it's this side. The other side had the scaling, it had the exam, it had the rec exam number. This side has all of this with the weight. If a lower than 70 pass point was deemed appropriate, let's just say, in the pass point analysis step of the process, or any real process that you take, then maybe all candidate scores need to be rescaled in order to make this lower pass point equal 70. I'm just using a 70, a 70-100 model. We'll see a few other examples coming up, but using the various min, max fields within the rec exam page, the user can kind of design a rescaling algorithm that will adjust each candidate's score accordingly. One thing to note, though, the rescaling of scores is optional. We can leave this as is, what we see here, but the scale it feature, the scale it link that we click on in a little bit, that's actually required because it determines the pass-fail status of each candidate. So once the pass-fail status of each candidate is finalized, the results can be sent over to Recruit and Onboard where each candidate's step status can be dispositioned accordingly. So we'll show a few examples of changes to pass points, like raw score, mins, maxes, things like that. And this screenshot that we're looking at right here, this is the page before any adjustments are made. Okay? So in our first example, let's say that we have a raw score of 65 and it results in a passing score of 70 out of 100. So then this is all that we'd have to change, what I've shown here, to make 65 result in a passing score of 70 out of a max of 100, right? Let me just quickly go over that. 65 is our raw score min, but someone can get, a raw score max of 100, so then the system would adjust those 65s to 70. 100s would remain 100, and the pass point would be 70. So if we were to save this, notice that 65 gets adjusted to 70, and all of the other scores are adjusted as well. So we might do this example if we have a situation where we're typically going by the default 70 out of 100, but decide that through analysis that the passing point needs to be lowered. Before I move on to other examples, I was told that there's a question, so let me kind of look that up real quick. Let's see, questions. Will there be a break? That's a good one. Yes, I will throw in a break. Actually, I think in our next system demo, it's going to be kind of, believe it or not, it's going to be about midway through the system demo, but it'll make sense when we do it. So I think that's probably going to be about maybe 10 minutes from now. That's what I'm thinking. That's my estimation. So I'm thinking about a 10 or 15 minute break so people can, break out and do what they need to do and get back. So hopefully that'll work for everybody. All right. So that's that example, 65 passing. Here's another example. Let's say that you want a raw score minimum of 42 out of a max of 60, but you want it to result in 70 out of 100 when it's kind of output as an adjusted score. So then we would just change the raw score min and max, but leave everything else the same, right? So just let me run down that real quick. We changed our raw score min that somebody can get to 42. The most questions they can get right is 60, but when we rescale it, we'll tell them, hey, if you got a 42, then you got a 70. If you got a 60, you got 100, and the new perfect score is 100, and the pass point is 100. So if we save this, then anybody that got a 42, their adjusted score would be 70. Anybody that got a 60, their adjusted score would be 100. And then, all of the other people are adjusted as well. Notice the person with 39 at the bottom, they had less than the 42, so they failed the test. We might do this if we have a test that only has a max of, far less than 100, and we want 42 to equate to a 70, for example, and 60 to equate to 100 in our example. We have another example too. Let's imagine that we have a raw score minimum of 42 and a raw score max of 60, and we actually want to just output it that exact same way. So it would result in a 42 out of 60. So in the screenshot, we're changing every field except for the weight. A 42 is the min, the raw score max is 60. When you get a 42, it's adjusted to 42. When you get a 60, it's for the maximum, it's adjusted to that. The best you can get, the new perfect score is 60, and your pass point is 42. So if we save this, people that have a 42, they'll be told they have a 42 that's passing. So, that might be an instance. We might do this if we're not worried at all about the 70 out of 100 model, right? And we just tell our candidates that 60 is the highest score they can get. So, as we said earlier, we can adjust these passing points, but it is optional. We do need to use, though, the scale it link. So under related links, we're required to click the scale it link, and once we do that, this means, we get confirmation that these scores have been scaled. This basically just means that their adjusted score for that assessment has been produced. And so here we see all of the candidates who have raw scores, now adjusted scores, and their pass-fail results after scaling it. And we're ready to rank the passed candidates, but if we choose not to rank, that's fine. We can also click the send it link as we did it earlier for schedules. This would just send the schedule and the raw score information as well as the pass-fail information. When information is sent over, it would overwrite any previous information if there was any to overwrite it. I mean, if nothing is changing, then it wouldn't overwrite it, obviously. So we'll move forward, though, in this these slides executing the ranking feature. Okay? So if we're not in the requisition, we access it like before. We click the rank candidates link under related links, and this is our page. After clicking that rank candidates link, it's before any changes are made. Here I've entered some points for Patty Crowley right there in the middle. I gave her 8 points, and click the rank it button. That produces the final rank in the far right corner. Notice also that we have 2 assessments here weighted at 50% apiece, but I did 2 here, but when you're doing assessments, it's always the same process. The only thing you wouldn't do is rank for each assessment. You would rank at the end of all assessments being done. And then we back out on the requisition. We look at the rankings tab. Here we see all of the candidates ranked, and we'd want to send all of that information over to Recruit and Onboard. So to do so, We click on our rec exam tab again. We click on our exam phase again. I mean, it would be, any of them. So once inside, under related links, we just click send it. And I mention this because the send it link is not visible where we're actually previously looking at our ranked candidates. But anyway, once it's sent over to Recruit and Onboard, we want to get over there and look at the ranking. So in Recruit and Onboard, after finding our requisitions and candidates in there, the step that we left them in, we access the list format button again. But this time, we're going to select multi-test score details there at the bottom, then click apply. And this would be the results in Recruit and Onboard with the rankings. Notice they're kind of like 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6. We would just click on the list promulgation result and it kind of sorts the ranking, right? We have a 1 through 6 there. So at this stage of the process, work in CPSA, believe it or not, is actually done. Duties would, now our webinar isn't done, but duties resume per normal in Recruit and Onboard. However you decide to progress through your CSW, duties would resume per normal. There are other branching scenarios happening within this overall process, such as sharing scores from rec to rec, such as self-scheduling and how that relates to CPSA instead of manually scheduling in CPSA. Those are going to get explained later. But next, we're going to kind of look at what we've seen in practice. So we'll get in the system, and I promise within this stage, there's going to be a break. All right. So the candidates, in our system testing, the candidates took their test. We've imported that info. We also have people that are being reused, but they're all with raw scores. We need to scale them to produce pass-fail and optionally rank that and send that to Recruit and Onboard. So we'll access the requisition that we're using, go to the Rec Exams tab and the actual rec exam itself. And as I said earlier, we would change the scheduling to scaling. And very important, since we made a change, we will save. One thing that we can do is look at pass point analysis. And this is our pass point analysis for these people. It has some of their EEO information, their cumulative frequency, and then suggestions on where maybe a different pass point needs to be used, if at all. And as I said earlier, once you've analyzed that and made any determinations on your pass point, maybe you decide to leave it the same, maybe you want to make changes, we're clicking our back button and those changes are made over here. So if we were to change that to 65, it would rescale. I'm not going to make any changes. You can do that as we described in the PowerPoints, but I'm not going to make any changes in the system. All right, so right now, as you can see near the, with all of these, they're just in the raw score. They have no adjusted score. So we are going to click Scale It. Candidate score, exam scores have been scaled using the current settings. So really, they're all the same because we made no changes here. If I would have made that, if somebody had a 65, that would have said failing down there, but say I changed this to 65 and passed, it would have made their 65 a 70 in this very specific instance. It also has their pass-fail results. Right? And so we've run the scale, and again, I'm going to rank these and send it over, but you don't have to rank. I think most people will want to, but some people may decide not to. So I'm going to rank. And under related links in this requisition, click rank candidates. Click the rank it button. And they're all ranked. We can look at their ranking. Salma Escobar has the best score of these people, and this is the rank that I am going to send to CPSA. So I'll click on my exam, rec exam, and click send it. And this is the point where I had planned for us to have a break because I know that the system is running slow. It'll take a little bit of time for this information to go over. So go ahead and start your break. Right now it's 11:03, 11:15, 11:15. How about we come back at 11:15? Hopefully that works for everybody. I will see you at 11:15. I'll click send it now. And we'll get back in our webinar. Okay, everybody, it's 11:15. I'll let a few people file back in, but we're going to get started very soon. All right, so we're going to go ahead and resume the webinar. We had kind of left off being over in CPSA. We ranked everybody and we sent them over to Recruit and Onboard, and that's where I'm at now. And you might remember in the slides what we did when we came back after the ranking is changed the list format again to the multi-list details and hit apply. So that way we can kind of see the results of this particular testing and ranking. All right, I think, okay, yeah, so one person failed. But if we change the list promulgation result, like otherwise if we click on this, it'll kind of put the people in their ranking, and for Patrick, we can disposition him, obviously, having failed the test. But as I was saying in the slides, essentially for the linear process that we kind of showed at a very high level very early in the webinar of, starting with the requisition, and you get candidates, they apply, you move them to CPSA and set everything up. Once they've came in, you've scored and rescaled, maybe you've imported and ranked and sent everything back. This would be kind of like the end of the duties in CPSA. We have our ranking. Now we do have a few other things that we're going to go over, so let's get back to the slides. So when establishing pass-fail for candidates and ranking them, let's remember we must change the status to scaling and save in order to eventually go from raw score to adjusted score and pass-fail results. We showed a few examples of adjusting min raw scores and so on, but you're not required to adjust the default 70 out of 100 setting that's already there. But either way, though, you must click the Scale It link to produce the pass-fail results. And then finally, when ranking candidates in CPSA and sending to Recruit and Onboard, remember to change the list format to multi-test score details to show the test results and ranking. Okay, so moving on to score sharing. This is kind of outside of that linear process. Only it's outside of it because you can do this within it, but it's just another way of like sharing scores from one rec to another. So in the next few sections, sharing scores from rec to rec and self-scheduling, how that's related to CPSA, we're branching away from the linear progression we saw earlier. With score sharing, we would have previously had a requisition where candidates applied and they were sent to CPSA, they were tested, scored, and that whole process was completed with the scores being in CPSA, and if you send them back to Recruit and Onboard, they'd be there too. That would be the source rec, or a term that we have to learn about, the feeder requisition. okay? Then we have a new requisition. Candidates apply to this new one, or you match them. You know, for example, the feeder is a pipeline, let's just say, and this new rec is one where you're going to match the candidates to it from the pipeline. So then once you're ready on this new one, you transfer the requisition and candidate information to CPSA. And at this point, you'd have a feeder rec with candidates and scores and a new target requisition with candidates and CPSA. Right? So our two terms that we're paying attention to are feeder requisition that has the, it's the source, and our new one, which is the target. So finally, within CPSA, by running a report that compares the feeder rec candidates against the target rec candidates, you output their scores, their schedules, dates, and times, and you import that information to the new requisition. Okay, so we'll go over that in more detail in the upcoming slides and of course in the system, and I'll explain how this is slightly different than our test retake eligibility report. Okay, so here we're starting with having candidates on a source requisition that have already went all the way through CPSA. They've been ranked, ranking data has been sent back to Recruit and Onboard. We begin this section after the recruiter has matched candidates from the feeder rec to another requisition, and this assumes that the new rec is set up to send candidates to CPSA, right? All of that, those procedures are followed. Notice that at the top it says 180,000 G1, so just kind of remember G1 is the feeder rec. So when I say feeder rec, that's the original rec that some of you may use to have people come in and test, but the candidate information resides there until it's shared to other recs. So this is the requisition where scores are being copied from. And then the target rec is the new requisition where those scores are being copied to. So in this screenshot right here, we're calling this our feeder rec, and we'll look at the candidates in their, let's just say, interview to be scheduled step. And then here's where we're picking up after. This is the, the feeder requisition was 180,000 G1, remember. This is our target rec. It's 180,000 G3 in this example. And we've matched, not all, but some of the candidates from the feeder to this target. Those 4 that we're looking at, they were on the feeder requisition. So we still transfer them to CPSA as well. So in here we see that we've placed them in that status. Over to the far left you see CPSA 4. That's these 4 candidates. And this is in CPSA. You might remember seeing that screen. They're in a status of initiated, meaning that we haven't done anything with them yet. No scheduling or scoring or anything. So we're going to go through some of the same processes as before, but with a slight variation. We still click the Rec Exam tab over in CPSA and click the blue New button. We still select our package phase. I mean, if it, whatever that might be. In this example, it's written here, and we select our exam, and we change our status to scheduling. So here I also changed it to group mode in the drop-down. And after saving that information, we click the Schedule Exam links under Related Links. But what's different, instead of selecting individual or group, we select scorecard only and hit the blue Submit button. No need to fill out schedule dates and times, capacity, session durations, and so on. Here's why we're using scorecard only. If we ever want to import information to a candidate's record on a rec, they first have to have a rec exam established, which establishes what CPSA refers to as a scorecard. They start out in initiated status, but we can't give a candidate a schedule or score without a scorecard. So whenever you give them an actual schedule, using, say, individual or group, and when you give them raw score, you're actually adding to an already established scorecard. So with scorecards, by the way, they get established also when you use individual or group. The difference between scorecard only and those other two options is scorecard only isn't filling in scheduled dates and times. The other two options are, and in addition, they're producing a scorecard. So with scorecard only, we're creating a blank scorecard with no individual or group information so that we can later import information to it. Since we're sharing scores, we'll be importing the feeder rec scheduled dates and times and the feeder rec raw scores. After establishing the this scorecard for each of the candidates, then from there we would just go over to run the copy scores report. And that's found on the menu on the left side of the page under scheduling. So we would click that report. And this brings up a page that asks us for the feeder requisition, and there's a search function for it, and the target requisition. We input those, and as you might remember, G1 was the feeder rec, G3 was the target rec. Once we find those, we click Generate Report, and for the 4 people that we had brought over that we matched to the new rec, and then we brought over to CPSA, we get a report already tailored for importing that shows their previous schedule information and raw score. Notice that the rec exam number also matches our new rec and with that -2 prefix. It's kind of ready to import. So on that same page, we click the blue Export to Excel button, and this produces the format that we saw in Excel. I've already removed those top 3 lines. And we save the Excel document as an Excel workbook so that it can be imported later. And then in the menu on the left side of the page under scoring, we've done this a few times now. We select import scores. Just a reminder, like importing before, we click on that paperclip icon, we click that choose files button, that pops in our spreadsheet, we click that X. So we click that X, we click the update data button, and we should get a blue bar near the top that says the records updated successfully. So then we can go back to our requisition and click on the Rec Exams tab, then the relevant Rec Exam phase. The raw scores and schedule date and time that the candidate took the test have been transferred to our new requisition, the target requisition from the feeder. Right? So that's the sharing of the scores. Now, at this stage, though, I think some of you might notice all that's happened is that the score sharing has been completed, but the raw scores are in there. These still have to have the scale it function completed, which will put in the adjusted score and give the pass-fail results. And then, the rank it function needs to occur after that, allowing you to rank the candidates and send that information to Recruit and Onboard if you decide to rank, or you could just send them without it being ranked. Lastly, I did want to try at least to explain the difference between sharing scores here and reusing scores with the test retake eligibility report. With sharing scores, the idea behind it is that you actually may have a rec that's a feeder rec where people test and their scores reside, and you want to match those out and share the scores. So when new target recs open up, you already have passing candidates and you share their scores out from one rec to another. What's different about the test retake eligibility report is simply that it's not looking at one rec to one rec. It's looking at all of your recs for the specific test that you're asking about to see if someone passed that test in any other rec. Whereas the sharing scores is sharing one rec to one rec. Now they're obviously similar, but CPSA obviously felt that they were separate enough to warrant two different reports. And so I wanted to show you how we can share scores from one rec directly to another. And I think probably what will happen is some people that use pipelines to store assessment results on one and then share those out to new target recs, they'll probably be using the sharing scores. But some other people might have uses that they'll find for it as well. So we'll kind of practice this in the system. All right, let's kind of start with Recruit and Onboard, and we are going to kind of show, just a reminder, we're assuming that we have a source feeder rec with scores already on it, and we want to get those scores to a new target rec. So I wanted to start by showing my source rec here in Recruit and Onboard, and I believe it's this one. And I think they already have information. They should, because, yeah. So imagine that this is my source rec. All of these people have their results. They've been ranked. They have, they've passed the exam. And then I'm going to have a kind of a target rec, a new rec, as well in Recruit and Onboard. And these people would have now been matched to the target rec, as well as, in this instance, I've already actually sent them over to CPSA, but that's something that we would want to do. So essentially, we've moved them to CPSA. 3 of the 5, on the source were actually matched for whatever reason. I mean, you can match all of them, but the point is we specifically chose 3 that needed to be matched to this target rec. So let's go over to CPSA. And let's kind of show our source rec over here too. It's been completed. And these are those 5 people. They would be the same 5 people that was on our source rec and Recruit and Onboard. All right, and then let's look at our target rec that we've sent over through to CPSA from Recruit and Onboard. Notice there's nothing over here under rec exams. We haven't done anything. They're just in the order status, so they're initiated. We've only sent them over. So with this situation, we've already tested people on the source rec, and we want to share them to the new rec. So then that's what we've done. We've matched the ones that we want to share to the new rec and sent them to CPSA. So we need to schedule them now. We're just going to say this is a written one. And our exam, and I'm just going to, for our purposes here, use 100 as our weight. And of course, as we've heard several times, anytime we make a change on the rec exam, or even a new, there has to be a save. And like we showed in the PowerPoint. We'll click on Schedule Exams, but we're not going to put any type of individual or group information in. We're just going to click Scorecard Only and the blue Submit button. And that does create them now underneath. Now everything's empty, but they're on there and they're essentially ready to be imported too. So since they are, let's go to the Copy Scores Report. And our feeder rec was the 180,000 IA, our target rec, IC. So I've essentially, in the feeder, that's the source, right? The target rec is the new. And one thing we know, before we do this, just let's talk about our expectations. One thing we know, there's 5 people here, right? But we've only matched 3 to the target rec. So when we generate this report, we really should just see those 3. So let's see what happens. And those are the 3 that show up because we match those to the new rec, and that's the expectation we would have, would be those 3 would be the ones that we want to report on. So let's go ahead and save this report. Oh, by the way, one more note. We were using IC as the 180,000 IC as the target. It's already input in there, which is nice. So we don't have to change it. All right. Okay, and this is the information that we were using. I mean, the parameters of our report. This is the feeder rec. This is the target rec. Same rec title as it turns out, and job code. And I'm going to remove the informational lines. I don't need them. And we will save this report so that we can import it. We'll go to our desktop in this instance. We'll call it Copy Scores 3/29/18. Actually, I don't want to do that. Again, we're saving as Excel workbook. So copy scores 3/29/18 as an Excel workbook and save. All right. Now we can essentially import this information to our target rec. Click on the paperclip icon and choose the copy scores spreadsheet that we just saved. Update data. And those records updated successfully. So let's go ahead and look over there on our target rec. IA was our source rec, but IC was our target rec. And then if we look at our exam phase and the 3 people, they now have their exam date and roll score. So we've essentially shared the scores from the source rec to the new rec. And of course, from here, it's just the raw score, so we'd still want to, scale it and produce the pass-fail, and then if we wanted to rank or not, either way, we can send that information back to our Recruit and Onboard target rec because, that's here. 180 180,000 IC in Recruit and Onboard is where this would be sent. So that would be score sharing. And we'll get back to our PowerPoint. Okay. So when sharing scores from rec to rec, this assumes you have candidates on a source requisition that have already had all processes completed, scored and ranked, and candidates have been matched to your new rec and sent to CPSA. On the new rec, the target rec, we still must establish the exam phase and weighting, then use scorecard only for scheduling so that we can import the feeder requisition information. And finally, when we finally run the copy scores report, we output the data, in this instance, saving it as an Excel workbook that we're going to import into the new rec. After import, we have to still scale it and optionally rank it, but send that information back to Recruit and Onboard. Okay. So we're on the last section of this webinar, and we'll also have one more section in the system, but it's self-scheduling as it relates to CPSA. And with self-scheduling, I wanted to give another high-level overview before we kind of dive into how this relates to CPSA. If you intend to both self-schedule and Recruit and Onboard and use CPSA. Now, self-scheduling still takes place in Recruit and Onboard. Otherwise, using the invite to self-schedule status, candidates choose their dates and so on, and that's all still happening in the same place. Since we're using CPSA in this instance, those self-scheduled candidates are still transferred to CPSA per normal procedures. Reports in Recruit and Onboard, though, once ran, output information that allows us to import to CPSA the self-scheduled dates and times when the time comes. And the way I'll be doing this is that we'll use Recruit and Onboard to report we'll actually use a Recruit and Onboard report to produce the roster and send it to the proctor. The proctor inputs the scores and any schedule changes, and it all comes back to you to import. Now, that's just suggested. You can import it right away, but the point is that's what I'll be showing. Since you're already somewhat familiar with importing at this point, the difference here is that you're getting self-schedule information from Recruit and Onboard once candidates have completed that process to devise the import document that goes into CPSA, as opposed to getting CPSA schedule information from the exam roster report in CPSA. So in the upcoming slides, we'll go into more detail and, of course, practice this in the system. So at this stage, you will have posted the rec, candidates applied, and the ones that met minimum qualifications were moved to CPSA when appropriate. This picks up any time after candidates went to CPSA, but before they're sent to invite to self-schedule. Additionally, the assumption is that you have a calendar and time slots and everything like that set up for self-scheduling. So I want to briefly go over why we would perform these functions before inviting to self-schedule. The reason is that once we establish them with a scorecard in CPSA, we can run the retake eligibility report to determine if we should even invite them to self-schedule. So for example, maybe they failed in the last few weeks and you don't want to invite them, or maybe they have a passing score that you want to reuse. So within CPSA, and like scheduling earlier, we create the rec exam phase. We choose the package phase, status of scheduling, we enter the weight of the exam. All that still happens. And after saving that data, we click the Schedule Exams link. So once on the scheduling page, we use the scorecard only option and submit that information. Now, like we learned earlier, once the scorecard only basically what I want to say, like we learned earlier, once the scorecard only option is used, we have scorecards for our candidates, is what I should say, and can import information for them. So again, we're doing this because we have to set it up later to import our self-scheduled dates and times. And before we invite them to self-schedule and recruit and onboard, though, we do want to ensure that they're eligible to take the exam and don't have a score we'll reuse. We've done this earlier in the training, but just as a reminder, we would run the test retake eligibility report to determine if our candidates are taking the test potentially in their retake period or have scores we can reuse. And we would know the dates because we would be sending those dates. We would have set those dates up for them to self-schedule in. So if they do come up with previous information, we would act accordingly as described earlier. And for this section of the training, I'm going to assume that candidates have no previous history, so I don't make this redundant for you. We would want to go back to recruit and onboard then and change the step status of those candidates that we sent over to CPSA to invite to self-schedule after this. This triggers notifications to the candidates, as you know, giving them a link that they can use to self-schedule themselves for your assessment. Obviously, this would only be for the people that are eligible to invite to self-schedule. Now, at this point, maybe some type of time window has transpired, or you've given them enough time, or the time to self-schedule is up, and you're ready to put their self-scheduled dates and times on a spreadsheet for a proctor and eventually get that information into CPSA. So if you're just logging in, you can just click on Oracle Business Intelligence on the left-hand side of Recruit and Onboard. Or if you're already in recruiting, you would just go to the Home button and select Oracle Business Intelligence. In either case, you're selecting that Oracle Business Intelligence. So once inside, you click on the catalog and find, that catalog is that second feature. So you would, in this instance, we're going to say Calendar Roster V1. We actually intend to rename this. So we'll send that information out. Unfortunately, I did not change that here. But anyhow, in our instance, it's Calendar Roster V1, and we would click Open. You're then given the option to select the requisition identifier. And then we would click that drop down, and at the bottom, notice the search function. We would click on that here. So type in the requisition exam number at the top near the name starts. I've typed in 180,000 G6. And as you type, it'll actually narrow down the search to the highlighted section you see there in yellow. And there are two double arrows over to the right. We click on those. And now the requisition is actually selected. So we can click OK to ensure that this is the requisition that we want to report on. Click OK once more, and it will generate the report. So this is our report of self-scheduled candidates with their candidate identifier and scheduled date and time. It also shows our rec identifier, and that was the one that we were searching on, 180,000 G6. As a note, remember that we created our exam phase in CPSA, and when we do that, it creates a postfix depending on the type of exam we selected. So with 180,000 G6, since we would have created, let's just say, for example, a written exam over there in CPSA, it would have numbered that exam phase 180,000 G6-2. So right here, this is only an example of the format. This has nothing to do with our data, but this is the format of what we would need to import. We can have other column headers, but CPSA only looks for these column headers that I'm showing and ignores the others when importing. So if you create a blank template with that information, you could always put this self-scheduled data right into it and save it. Now, just as a note, I have plans of sending everybody out a blank template that has those column headers as well as the data types in each field, and more on that later. So from the web page that shows our results in Recruit and Onboard, when running the report in Recruit and Onboard, we can actually just highlight the information and copy it. From Recruit and Onboard, we don't have to output this to Excel. And we can then paste that information into a related column of our import spreadsheet. So the only information that I've pasted thus far is the ID and the exam date, but I can fill out the rec exam number since I would know what it is. From there, though, as I said, we can type the rec exam number in this column. So 180,000 G6-2 if it's if it's written. That way, when we import, it'll know exactly which assessment to import this information to. Note that we do not have a raw score yet, since the candidates obviously haven't tested. Now, as I said earlier, we can add any other columns to this that we want. And in this example, I'm just adding a few. So we would send this roster to the proctor of the exam so that she would know who's coming in on the various schedules. Now, assuming that people come in after this and our proctor sends this information back to us, a recruiter, it could look something like this, for example. So that might be the information sent back to us to import. So we would follow our previous instructions on importing by clicking on Import Scores under Scoring, importing the spreadsheet that we got back from the proctor, and once we've done that, we would see our schedules and raw scores that we see here. Now, like before, we're only at raw scores at this point, so as you know, you'll still want to scale the scores and optionally rank them, and then send that information back to CPSA. Or I'm sorry, to Recruit and Onboard. You're in CPSA. So let's kind of get in the system then and see how this looks. So we're going to be scheduling scorecard only in CPSA, but before we've sent them along, to self-schedule. So let's start with our requisitions. And this was the one. So these people are just in the order status. They've been sent over, but they've not been invited to self-schedule or anything like that. They've just been sent over. So we want to, again, like we've seen a few times, create a rec exam for them. So I chose written in this example. And let's see. Chose my exam as well. We'll go group, and I'm just doing 100 per normal. I mean, it could be multiple phases. And saving. And then in order to schedule them, scorecard only, so they have a scorecard, but we don't have an actual exam date and time because they're going to be invited, so we don't know what it is yet. We at least have them entered in now so that we can import that information later. So just a reminder, also at this stage, we would run the retake eligibility report just to determine if any of these people shouldn't be scheduled due to reusing their score or failing in retake. And then we would just go over to recruit and onboard like we saw before and deal with them the same way. You know, disposition the failing people, move the reuse people out of the way so they don't get moved to invite to self-schedule. We're just going to move forward though, assuming that none of these people came up on our test retake eligibility. So let's go over to recruit and onboard. And find that same requisition. It was IF. So let's see what step they're in. They're not in CPSA. I've already actually moved them to invite to self-schedule simply because I didn't want you to have to watch me go and apply them individually. But essentially, they would, at this stage, already be in CPSA, and then you would use the more actions drop-down and invite them all to self-schedule by choosing that step. And I've already did that. So some time would have passed. These people have all actually selected their scheduled date and time, although one of them I purposefully didn't. So essentially following the slides, we would go to reporting. And find our report. Has it been updated, the name? Let's see, one moment here. Self-scheduling roster. Okay, I apologize. So I don't want to make this confusing. The name is self-scheduling roster. I had it as calendar roster V1 or something in our slides, but it is self-scheduling roster. And that's, and we'll include that in the Q&A, and that is the name of the roster that you would use in production when you eventually run this report. Self-scheduling roster sounds a lot better than calendar roster V1, basically. All right, so let's open this report and click the drop down and then search. And we were using 180,000 IF. That's this. We'll move that over. It's selected. Okay, and then we click OK to output the results. I didn't actually do anything for Darlene. So, I mean, like essentially, I just wanted to show that this also shows people not scheduling in case you were wondering, instead of like not showing them at all. But these three people did actually, choose a schedule. And I already have my template up to, just import their information into. So essentially, I can copy from here directly to the spreadsheet. I don't have to actually output it. And their exam date and time, I can do the same. And there might be many of these people, who knows, but it's all one copy paste. I also know that this is 180,000 IF. It's a written, so oops. So I could put that information in each of these, or copy it down would have been a lot faster. And at this stage, I at least have the, roster of people that self-scheduled, and I can save that. So we'll just go ahead and save it. This is, we would basically at this point, I mean, you can import this as is into CPSA, but as part of process, one thing that I felt is we would send this information out to the proctor, and then, they would fill the raw score. And you could, of course, as you know, as we had shown earlier, you could have other, column headings of comments or whatever you want to add to it. But we would send it out to the proctor, and as long as these 4 came back, this is all that the system is looking for. So we'll go ahead and enter some information as if that's actually happened, and save it as a document that we're getting back from the proctor. So we'll just say 95, 94, 93. Go ahead and save that. So within CPSA, since we've gotten that back as the recruiter, we can go to import that information. Just a real quick reminder, this is IF. We'll just show that there's nothing in there now. So there's nothing there now, and we also know that Darlene Margar didn't come in, but we'll import information. Oh, I have to remember what I called it. Sorry. Self-schedule import. Okay. Choose our file from our desktop. I'm not seeing it. I apologize for that, folks. I probably didn't save it in the right place. So let me just save it to my desktop. Oh, it's in that document. Okay, that's why I can't find it. Okay. Now we can choose our file. Okay, maybe not. There it is. I'm figuring out this Windows stuff as we speak. All right, self-schedule import to, yes. And we will, again, as you've seen before, update data. And then we'll look over at our requisition. And see that those people at least have their information in. The people that self-scheduled as well as their raw scores. Now, of course, we could have, we could have imported just the dates too, or we can import both. It just depends on your process. And that is all of the webinar in terms of in the system. I have a few more slides, but I wanted to switch over to some of the questions because I know there are some, so we'll go to those. Are we going to discuss how to use CherryRoad to send the candidates their test scores? So their test scores, what I wonder is, because all of that information is in Recruit and Onboard, you would, one thing I will say is that you're not sending the correspondence from CPSA, and the only place that you would send it is from Recruit and Onboard. So if you have correspondence in Recruit and Onboard to send, regarding test scores, you can do that from Recruit and Onboard. I don't know if that's where you're getting at. Maybe you're wondering which system would we send it from, but it definitely would be from Recruit and Onboard. However, I do think it's important that, So my assumption is that any current correspondence that exists, though, just that the functionality exists to send individual, just that the functionality exists to send individual candidates their individual test scores. Right, so the correspondence feature in Recruit and Onboard is what we would use to send them their test scores that are in, that have come over from CherryRoad. But one thing I will say, I'm wondering, let me pause more. Okay, so one thing about the correspondence is I'm thinking that there's no correspondence in Recruit and Onboard right now that has the tokens that we saw. Yeah, and we'll when we send out the Q&A, we'll kind of confirm that. But I don't think there's any correspondence in Recruit and Onboard right now that has those tokens. I think that's an easy thing to do, though. So I think that we can work with agencies to get that correspondence in there. That shouldn't be a problem. Are you going to discuss entering veteran preference points? I did actually in the slides. I didn't when I ranked. So let's just do that real quick since we're talking about it. Let me do that with these people. I have to switch my screen around a little bit. Let's go ahead and scale these people. Save. Scale it. And then this is IF. Let's rank them. So during the ranking is when you would actually, and I had done this with Patty Crowley in the slides, but here we'll just do this with John Mark. And I don't know, I mean, I'm just going to enter any piece of information. I'll just say, I don't know, 5 points. So, and then that's where our veterans rankings are entered, and then we hit the rank it button and we look and see that John Mark, although he wasn't number one to begin the process, he's number one now. So the ranking, or I'm sorry, the veterans points is done in the process of doing your ranking. Good question, by the way. I do have a few more slides, so I'm going to move forward with those, just kind of wrapping up. So when using self-scheduling in Recruit and Onboard and importing data to CPSA, the rec exam phase still needs to be made, and we schedule the candidates in CPSA under scorecard only. The candidates are invited to self-schedule and Recruit and Onboard, and once they've completed that process, we run a report in Oracle BI to show their scheduled dates and times. The information in that report is sent to the proctor, or at least it can be, who later fills it out with the raw scores and any other information and sends it back. And then that information gets imported to the proper requisition exam phase. Of course, they would have the requisition exam phase on the spreadsheet. So in the last instance we saw in the system is 180,000 IF-2, so it would know to go directly to that. And that, that concludes our webinar. We've went through the process from the configuration needed on our Recruit and Onboard rec to moving the candidates to CPSA, scheduling either there or through Recruit and Onboard self-scheduling, then candidates attending their test and the proctor sending that information back to be imported, then scaling the scores to produce pass, fail, and ranking, and sending that back to Recruit and Onboard. And in addition, we did cover sharing the scores from rec to rec. Some parting notes: if you have additional questions later that maybe you haven't thought of just yet, you can email the Recruit and Onboard mailbox. And emails that we will be sending out to users that have already signed up for CPSA, I'm going to show you what those are, but just as an aside, for those of you that don't have access, you haven't signed up, and you don't have access at Go Live, you should contact your HR administrator if you do not believe you have the permissions needed to, perform job duties in CPSA. I would do this preemptively so as to kind of allow enough time to fill that request. But the email's coming soon to users. Of course, your user name and password will be coming to you. I had said earlier I'm going to send out an import template in Excel, and of course the CPSA website link that you could either make a shortcut on your desktop to, or I think a lot of people will probably make favorites in their browser. And that is it. That is the webinar.